My son stood at the doorway, grinning proudly as guests streamed into my living room. Streamers hung from the ceiling, the scent of lemon cake drifted through the air, and soft jazz played in the background. It was my 70th birthday, and Kevin had insisted on planning the entire thing himself. "You've done enough for everyone else, Mom," he said a week ago. "Let me do this for you." I was touched. For the past 6 months, I had watched Kevin rebuild himself after his messy divorce from Amber. He had moved into my guest room, bringing with him boxes of regrets and stories of betrayal. I believed every word. So when I saw Amber walk through the door, my heart nearly stopped. She strolled in like she belonged, holding a gift bag and wearing that familiar, polished smile. Kevin rushed over and hugged her. Not the awkward, polite kind of hug you'd give an ex-wife, but the kind filled with familiarity. I swallowed hard, waved politely, and turned toward the kitchen, telling myself not to ruin my own party. That's when I heard them. Their voices floated in from the hallway, half laughing, half whispering. "She totally bought it," Amber said, her voice dripping with amusement. "The whole poor, heartbroken son routine? Genius." Kevin chuckled. "Just wait. Once she sells the house, we'll be set. That trust fund of hers is our startup capital." Amber giggled. "Cheers to manipulating mommy dearest." I stood frozen behind the fridge door, hands trembling, ears burning. They thought I was fragile. Gullible. Easy to play. But they'd just made one mistake, underestimating the woman who raised them both better than that. My name is Margaret Johnson. I'm 68 years old, or 70 now, I suppose, and I've spent most of my life teaching high school English in Portland. I'm a widow, a grandmother, and, until recently, someone who believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. Especially my son. Kevin was my only child. When his father passed 10 years ago, we leaned on each other more than ever. I helped him through college, watched him marry a woman I never quite trusted, and supported him even when he made choices I didn't agree with. Because that's what mothers do. We love. We show up. We keep the doors open, even when it hurts. When he showed up at my front door 6 months ago with tears in his eyes and a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, I didn't hesitate. He told me the divorce was devastating. That Amber had blindsided him, run off with someone else, left him broken. He looked thin, pale, not like himself. I set up the guest room, stocked the fridge with his favorite foods, and told him he could stay as long as he needed. At first, it felt like the old days. He'd sit at the kitchen table while I made tea, talk about finding a new job, maybe going back to school. I listened. I encouraged. I even slipped him some extra money here and there for car repairs and groceries. Every time he said thanks, Mom, I felt like I was helping him get back on his feet. Amber was never part of those conversations. As far as I knew, they hadn't spoken since the divorce. I didn't ask questions, I thought I was respecting his privacy. What I didn't know was that he wasn't rebuilding. He was rehearsing. Preparing for an act I never auditioned for. And by the time my birthday came around, he'd already written the final scene. All I had to do was play the fool. But I was about to rewrite the ending. The signs had been there, I suppose. Small, quiet warnings that I brushed aside because they didn't fit the version of Kevin I wanted to believe in. At first, it was the job search that never led anywhere. Every week he'd say, "I've got a few leads," but there were no interviews, no resumes printed on the office printer, no shirts ironed. Then came the late nights. He'd leave after dinner, claiming he needed air, and return smelling faintly of cologne and cheap beer. I chalked it up to stress. Maybe he was just trying to feel normal again. Then there were the phone calls, muttered conversations in the backyard, laughter drifting in from the porch when he thought I was asleep. I caught glimpses of him texting with someone he quickly labeled as an old friend. Once, when he left his phone on the kitchen counter, a message lit up the screen, "Can't wait to wake up next to you again." I told myself it could have been anyone. But in my heart, I knew. Still, I kept feeding him, listening to his excuses, pretending not to notice the way he avoided my eyes. When he offered to plan my 70th birthday party, I hesitated. "You don't have to go through the trouble," I told him. But he insisted. "You've done everything for me, Mom. Let me take care of you for once." It sounded sweet. Honest, even. But now I know, it was strategy. A setup. A stage dressed in balloons and lemon cake. The night of the party, I wore my favorite navy blue dress and a string of pearls my husband had given me on our 25th anniversary. I greeted guests with warm smiles and careful hugs, doing my best to quiet the unease crawling beneath my skin. And then Amber walked in. She looked exactly as I remembered her, polished, confident, lips painted in a shade too bold for the occasion. She beelined straight for Kevin, who greeted her with a familiarity that betrayed the story he'd told me. There was no awkward tension. No hint of an estranged past. Just two people who knew exactly where they stood. She handed me a gift bag and said, "Happy birthday, Margaret." "It's been too long." I smiled tightly, thanked her, and turned toward the kitchen before I said something I couldn't take back. That's when it happened. I reached for the cake knife, and I heard their voices drifting from the hallway. "She has no clue," Amber said, giggling. "It's actually kind of impressive how clueless she is." Kevin snorted. "You know what did it? That whole pathetic act. Me showing up all torn apart? Worked like a charm. She even offered to co-sign a business loan last week." Amber laughed louder. "And once she sells the house, game over. We'll have everything we need." I stood there, fingers gripping the counter so tightly my knuckles ached. My own son. My blood. Mocking me in my kitchen like I was some senile old woman too naive to notice she was being played. But what they didn't know, what they never expected, was that I'd spent 4 decades outsmarting teenagers who thought they were clever. They were amateurs. And the lesson was about to begin. I didn't confront them that night. I didn't storm out of the kitchen, didn't shout or demand answers in front of our guests. That would have given them the scene they were hoping for, a display of emotion they could twist into guilt, confusion, maybe even another manipulation. No, I'd been underestimated once. It wouldn't happen again. So I walked back into the dining room, smiled as if nothing had happened, and let them believe I was still in the dark. I accepted birthday wishes, opened gifts, posed for photos, and even thanked Kevin for all his effort. Every word tasted like ash on my tongue, but I forced them out with the grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime keeping her composure. Later that night, when the house was quiet and Kevin had gone out for a walk, I sat at my desk and pulled out a yellow legal pad. I began to make a list. Not of what they'd taken, because thankfully, they hadn't gotten that far, but of what they'd tried to. My trust. My safety. My home. By the time Kevin came back, I was in bed with the lights off. I listened as he moved through the kitchen, humming to himself, completely unaware that something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a woman preparing for war. And I wasn't going to fight it with anger. I was going to fight it with precision. The next morning, I called my attorney. Robert Granger had been handling my affairs for over 15 years, wills, insurance, retirement planning. He was sharp, discreet, and not easily rattled. When I told him what I'd overheard in my kitchen, he went quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Let's make sure they never get a dime." By the end of the day, we had a plan. I moved quickly, methodically, with the kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. We created an irrevocable trust, one that locked down my house, savings, and pension accounts, naming my granddaughter Lily as the sole beneficiary. Lily, who had never once asked for money. Who sent me postcards from campus and brought me fresh scones when she came home on weekends. Who never pretended to be anyone but herself. The trust included very specific language: I could remain in the house for the rest of my life, all expenses for my care would be covered, and under no circumstances could the assets be redirected, borrowed against, or released to anyone else. Not even my son. Then I took it a step further. I offered Lily the spare bedroom, the one Kevin had been living in. She had just been accepted into graduate school and was planning to find housing nearby. I told her she could move in rent-free in exchange for helping me with errands and the garden. She lit up like I'd handed her a winning lottery ticket. "Wait," she said. "Where's Uncle Kevin going?" I smiled gently. "That's a conversation I'll be having soon." For the next 2 days, I acted like everything was normal. I made dinner, left the porch light on, folded his laundry. Kevin continued his charade without a hiccup, cheerful, helpful, dropping hints about starting fresh and how, if the house were sold at the right time, it could really fund something special. He was right about one thing: the timing was perfect. On Sunday afternoon, I invited Kevin and Amber to lunch. Just the three of us. I said I wanted to talk about the future, estate stuff, I told him, just to get everything in order. He looked thrilled. Amber even brought a notepad. They arrived at noon, dressed too nicely for a casual lunch, eyes bright with anticipation. I served chicken salad, lemonade, and peach cobbler. I let them talk about their new idea, a boutique wine bar that would honor Portland's history but bring in a younger crowd. Kevin said things like liquidity and emotional buy-in. Amber nodded as if she'd already run the place for years. When they were done, I stood, walked into the kitchen, and returned with a large envelope. I placed it on the table between us. "What's this?" Kevin asked. "It's a trust," I said calmly. "One that protects everything I built, from both of you." Amber blinked. Kevin frowned. "Mom, I don't understand." "You don't need to," I said. "Because it's already filed. The house is no longer in my name. My accounts are no longer within your reach. And in 30 days, I expect you to be out of this house." He looked stunned. "You're evicting me?" "Yes. Officially. I've spoken to a lawyer, and everything is in order. I've also arranged for someone else to move in." Right on cue, the front door opened, and Lily stepped inside, holding a set of keys and a box labeled books, grad school. She waved, slightly awkward. Amber's face flushed. Kevin stood abruptly, his chair scraping the tile. "You don't have to do this," he said, voice rising. "We were going to bring you in on the business, this doesn't have to be." I raised a hand. "Stop. I heard everything, Kevin. The night of my birthday. In my kitchen. The pathetic act, the jokes, the plan. You weren't grieving, you were scheming. And I may have raised a fool, but I refused to die as one." He opened his mouth again, but I didn't give him the chance. 30 days. Not a word more. Then I turned to Lily. "Welcome home, sweetheart." She walked to my side, set her box on the ground, and gently took my hand. Amber and Kevin stood there for a beat longer, speechless. Then they walked out. Kevin didn't speak to me for the next 4 weeks. He packed slowly, sullenly, like a teenager grounded for the first time. No apologies. No last-ditch efforts to win me over. Just cold silence and heavy footsteps up and down the stairs as he moved his things out, one bitter box at a time. Amber didn't come by again. I suppose once the money was off the table, so was the relationship. I didn't chase either of them. Lily moved into the guest room that same week. Within hours, the house felt warmer. She filled the kitchen with quiet music, brewed loose-leaf tea in a real pot, and offered to help me with everything from changing light bulbs to pruning roses. At night, we'd sit on the porch, watching the street lights blink on, and she'd tell me about her thesis while I knit baby blankets for the church. One morning, I walked past Kevin's old room. The door was open, sunlight pouring across the now tidy bed and fresh potted plant on the windowsill. Lily had hung a corkboard above the desk with notes and little sketches. The air smelled like peppermint and clean paper. It no longer felt like a room filled with betrayal. It felt like renewal. The day Kevin's eviction period ended, he came by one last time to collect a duffel bag he'd left in the closet. I didn't say much, just opened the door and handed it to him. He looked past me into the hallway, as if he expected some parting speech or a tearful breakdown. But there was none. "You really did it," he said, more bitter than surprised. "You actually kicked your own son out." "No," I replied evenly. "You did that. I just made it official." He didn't respond. He just turned and walked to his car. I watched him go without anger. Only a quiet ache, not for the man he had become, but for the boy I once rocked to sleep and read bedtime stories to, never imagining he'd grow up thinking manipulation was a form of love. Inside, Lily was making coffee. She looked up and said, "Want me to start breakfast?" I smiled. "That'd be lovely." We sat down at the table, just the two of us, and shared a meal in a house finally free of secrets. It's been 3 months since Kevin walked out of my life. The silence he left behind didn't echo with grief like I thought it might. Instead, it made room for clarity, for peace, for things that had been drowned out by worry and second-guessing. I thought I'd mourn him more, but I've learned that when someone chooses deceit over decency, what you're really mourning is the version of them you created in your mind. Lily's laughter now fills the halls where tension once lived. She brings home fresh vegetables from the farmer's market, reads me her drafts over tea, and leaves sticky notes on the fridge with little jokes or reminders to drink water, not just coffee. She asks about my day. She listens. She shows up. The trust Robert and I set up has become more than a legal safeguard, it's become a symbol. A boundary. A quiet but powerful declaration that love does not require sacrifice without limit. That generosity must not be confused with blind permission. A few weeks ago, I found a birthday card in a drawer that Kevin had written years ago. It said, "You've always believed in me more than I believed in myself." I read it twice, then placed it gently in a box with other things I no longer needed to carry. Because here's what I've learned: belief in someone only works if they believe in being better. If they don't, your love becomes a resource for their manipulation. I walk each morning now, slowly, through the neighborhood I've lived in for 40 years. Neighbors wave. Some of them heard whispers about what happened. Portland is a big city, but communities are small. A few have said things like, "You're braver than I could have been." But it wasn't bravery. It was survival. Last Sunday, after church, Lily and I made lemon bars. She asked me if I was angry with Kevin. I thought for a long moment. "No," I said. "I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done." That night, I lit a candle, sat by the window, and wrote something in my journal I'd been thinking for weeks. Forgiveness doesn't mean returning to what hurt you. Sometimes it just means releasing the need to keep holding it. I don't know if Kevin will ever come back, not physically, but in spirit. If he does, I hope he's changed. I hope he's found something real. But if he hasn't, that's not my burden anymore. Because I'm not just someone's mother. I'm a woman with a name, a past, a future, and a house that now holds only honesty. And that's how I learned that protecting your peace isn't selfish, it's sacred. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge is choosing to heal without needing permission. And that's how I learned that trust should never be blind, not even when it wears your last name. Ever had to choose peace over family? Share your story in the comments. Like this story? Tap subscribe to hear a new true revenge story every day. And send this to someone who needs to protect their boundaries.